And now I am very excited to welcome back a college football betting specialist in Paul Stone from Paul Stone Sports in VSiN. You can follow Paul on Twitter at Paul Stone Sports. Paul, my man, we're less than a month away from week one. How is your summer going, my man? How are things back in Texas?
Going real well, Kiev. Just getting ready for college football. Like a lot of people, my preparation's kind of year round. Obviously it's intensified the last couple of months as we've drawn closer to the season. But just looking forward to it. It's the same excitement this time every year. You hope you've done the work, and there's always more work to be done. So we'll have games here in just a little over 3 weeks as we record. So really looking forward to it.
All right. Well, and like I just mentioned, we both have Circa hats on. So let's CC Mike Palm over there and just make sure he knows that we got the Circa hats going on. So there you go. And, we'll be there too, talking about some NFL contests. And that's going to be exciting. And week 0 college football, I think I might have a few little plays going on for week 0. But this podcast, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Big 12. Obviously, we'll get into some other stuff at the end, but Big 12 is a focus. You're in Big 12 country. I know you lost to Texas, obviously Oklahoma across the border there, but you still got Texas Tech, TCU, plenty of Big 12 around you. So I'm excited to talk about that. But Paul, before we talk into that, I got to ask, who's your top 5 power rated teams? I go against the grain a little bit. I'm a little bit different than others, but I want to ask you yours, and then I'll give you mine.
Okay. Yeah. These are power ratings, not to be confused with, the traditional AP poll or something like that. I'm trying to assess the relative strengths of the teams going into the year. And the team that I have number 1 is not necessarily the team that I think is going to win the national championship. But without further ado, and I'll give just a little bit of explanation and give it away right off the bat. Let's start number 5. I was going to give number 1. We'll go down. Okay. That's more exciting if that's okay.
It's great.
Number 5 is a team that I think I'm much more bullish on this year. They really hit it big in the transfer portal, shored up their defense, brought in some talent there on that side of the ball where they need help. But my number 5 team, the LSU Tigers, and veteran quarterback Garrett Nussmeier. I like LSU to make the playoff. The number 4 team would be, see, I'm getting confused now that I'm going backwards, would be Georgia. Obviously, one of the premier programs in all of college football the last 6 or 7 years or so. They're under Kirby Smart. Like a lot of teams kind of at the top of the college football totem pole, they have some quarterback questions. So Georgia, number 4. Number 3 would be the defending national champion Ohio State Buckeyes. They certainly have some outstanding candidates. I think the likely starter at quarterback will be Julian Sayin against the Longhorns on Saturday, August 30th, but he'll be a newcomer. That'll be his first meaningful action there against the Longhorns. Number 2, the Texas Longhorns. They're my number 2 power-rated team. I really like this Texas team. Steve Sarkisian, the last 4 years, consensus, top 3 or better recruiting classes. The program's in good shape, and he's got it, I think, where he and Longhorn fans kind of dreamed it would be when he took over several years back. And then number 1, the Penn State Nittany Lions. And I know that some people will scoff at that, because James Franklin can't win the big one. And, Drew Aller hadn't played his best in the big games and so forth. But these are power ratings, and certainly those types of things are taken into account. But I just look at this Penn State roster with the amount of veterans they have, especially on offense. I mean, you got the running backs, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. They've combined for almost 5,800 yards rushing their first 3 years. You have a veteran quarterback in Drew Aller, who I think is primed to take the next step. They have shored up the wide receiver position in a big way. They brought in several guys through the portal, the most notable of those being Trevor Pena from Syracuse. So Penn State starts the year, and it could change quickly, and it could even change before the year. My power ratings are fluid. I'm always examining them, but I think that's the way that I'll start the year outside of any injuries in camp or unknown injuries with those teams as my top 5.
Yeah, it's tough to argue with that. I And I'm glad he clarified. Yeah, the top doesn't mean you're necessarily picking them to win. And with the James Franklin team, they can always come in strong and then kind of blow it just by some of the reasons that he does. So, what you say makes a lot of sense to me from how you said it. But what's funny for me is from 1 through 8, they're very, very close. And I think all the teams you mentioned in there for me are very close. I have LSU is basically tied with Oregon for 7 and 8 anyway. And I might move LSU up even a little bit. And I didn't hear a Clemson from you, so maybe that is a tell for that +3.5 you're looking at right now for week 1, college football, LSU at Clemson. So I find that very interesting. But I'm like that myself because I don't have Clemson in my top 8, but I do have. I guess when you say my top 4, I have to say 5 because I have Notre Dame and Texas as at 4 and 5. And here's the thing: I think Notre Dame reloaded extremely well. They got a couple big 300-pound defensive tackles there. Their quarterback should be fine. Could even be better than last year. Good receiving core, great coach over there in Freeman, and they've just been doing a fantastic job. In Texas, I got to tell you, I'm just not sure about Manning yet. Maybe he's good, maybe he's not. I'm not saying he's not. I definitely wouldn't take his number for Heisman, but I want to see it a little bit more first. And then to be honest with you, at 3, I got Alabama because Alabama still should have one of the best defenses, and they have some of the best players in football right now. I'm curious about Simpson, but I think nobody's talking enough about Ryan Williams, that wonderful receiver that they have. I think he is fantastic. And if Jeremiah Smith's number 1, he's number 2 for sure. And maybe we see them flip-flop a little bit back and forth this year. And then Penn State at number 2 and Ohio State at number 1, because I'm just not going to take it from Ohio State until somebody proves it to me, I guess. And Ohio State, could be even better with saying coming in this year than they finished last year. There's a chance of that because you got some extra time now with Jeremiah Smith and some of those younger players getting bigger. So, that's going to change, and power ratings always do. But no argument from me, Paul. I think your power ratings are absolutely great.
You mentioned, I was just going to jump in here real quick before it gets away from us. You mentioned Clemson. Clemson actually has the same power rating in my ratings as LSU, but I do rank them numerically, even if they have the same numbers. So Clemson's my number 6 team with the same power rating as LSU. So you add 3.5 for home field, and it comes in, right where the number is. So Clemson right there with LSU.
That's fair enough. And I have Clemson at number 10, just a little bit under LSU, but not by much. So here we are. It's going to be fun to see how these all break down throughout the season, obviously for the first 3 weeks when people are making the bigger changes. And speaking about bigger change, Paul, I want to ask you this because, I think it's an underrated question that podcasts don't talk about it much. I want to know who your biggest teams upgrades and downgrades are from last season. So, there's obviously quarterback changes, coaching moves, and things that could make bigger differences in your ratings. But who are the biggest upgrades first for 2025?
And that's a great question, and I'm certainly prepared to answer it. But I will say that I'm a guy who I don't throw away my power ratings, kill them out of the computer and all that from last year, but I don't reference them when I make my my New Year power ratings. I don't look at a team and say, okay, well, they're 3 points better on defense. They're 7 worse on the other side of the ball. So -4, they're going to start out 4 points. Some people kind of do it in that methodology, at least as part of it. And I like to start with a clean slate. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And the way that I do my power ratings is I know what a 95 numerical power rating looks like according to my model. I know what a 75 team looks like and so forth. So I'm doing this kind of off of the top of my head, but at the same time, I'm doing it with a great deal of confidence that these are the teams who would have the biggest upgrades. And I'm going to start. I've got 2 of them for you. One would be, and this is not any great revelation, other people have said the same thing and will continue to say the same thing over the next few years, but it's the Utah Utes of the Big 12 that we'll talk about today. They had a disappointing season last year, obviously at 5-7. Bring in Devin Dampier from New Mexico, came with his offensive coordinator, Jason Beck from New Mexico. and very athletic quarterback, almost 2,800 yards passing last year, 1,200 yards rushing. So a very dynamic dual threat guy. They're one of my biggest upgrades. And then Southern Mississippi of the Sun Belt. I mean, they are a kind of a poster child for how a team's fortunes can change from one year to the next. And I'm not saying they're going to win the Sun Belt, although I think they might be worth a long shot ticket. But Southern Miss was one of the very worst. I think last year we had 134 FBS teams. We've added 2 this year. Out of the 134 FBS teams, Jeff Sagrin, if you ever look at his rankings, he integrates FCS teams into the rankings. So some of those will be ahead of some of the FBS. And with 134 FBS teams last year, end of season, Southern Miss was 193rd. So they had 60 FCS teams. They were bad. I mean, maybe not historically bad for an FBS, but 1-11, their only victory over Southeastern Louisiana of the FCS. But as you know, they bring in a new coach, Charles Huff from Marshall. He brings in about 20 of his best players from Marshall. And the thing about Marshall is they won the Sun Belt Conference last year.
Yeah.
So these are good players. One of those players coming in, quarterback Braylon Braxton, the preseason offensive player of the year this year in the Sun Belt. So Southern Miss has changed their fortunes literally overnight. I think they're a team that could make a bowl. They could be 6-6. So they've seen a great deal of upgrading in my power ratings.
I'm glad you mentioned Southern Miss because I haven't had an upgrade so large in my power ratings for as long as I can remember, at least since Colorado and Dion came there and brought all the stars there. You know, it was massive because I had Southern Miss as one of my worst teams, you know, sitting down there next to the Kent States and some of those teams. And now you're looking, not only does he bring like 17, 18 players from Marshall, you know, he keeps the ones that were serviceable and possibly good over at Southern Miss. You have to think that this team's going to be really good. 24-point upgrade. I feel embarrassed saying that, but it was my largest by far, you know, move for this season. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And then we'll get to the downgrades, but you can expect Marshall to be on that list as soon as we get to there. But Oregon State is one. I think they're looking up and up this year. I like what they're doing. They're a pretty big upgrade for me around the 9 to 10 point area. That was a big one for me. I'm glad you mentioned Utah because Utah is one of my bigger ones. And believe it or not, I think there's a lot of people sleeping on Northwestern. I have Northwestern as a pretty big upgrade now that they got that quarterback from SMU. And I think it's a big upgrade for them. And they didn't really lose a lot of production. And if you remember, they finished a pretty strong last season. I bet them over their season win total of a low 3.5. And I think they're, you know, just in that Big Ten where wins are very possible. They should be able to get to 4 or 5 wins for sure with that schedule. So thanks for bringing all those up. That's great. South Florida is another one. I think I upgraded them 6.5. Air Force is a big one too. I expect good things out of Air Force. So those are some of my bigger upgrades. What about downgrades, Paul? Any of the ones, any suspects that we just mentioned, maybe some usual suspects or anything surprising?
Well, I'm going to start with the team last year, I think, that won 10 games last year in 2024. And it's a team that averaged 34 points a game, the Syracuse Orange. And this is a team, again, that averaged 34 a game. And, man, they lost everybody. They lost their quarterback, Kyle McCord. They lost a back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher in LaQuinn Allen. Last 2 years, he's gained over 1,000 in each of those seasons, 2023 and 2024. And then Trevor Pena, who goes over to Penn State, just one of the wide receivers out the door, not all through the portal. Some have exhausted their eligibility, but their top 3 receivers combined last year, and they're all gone, 235 catches, 2,896 yards, and 23 touchdowns. So tons of production there. It's going to be very difficult for them to replace that. They just, you know, they don't have any proven talent hardly at all on the offensive side of the ball. So they're going to go from 34 points a game to 24. You know, they're going to probably drop by 10 points on their per game average, I would suspect. And then the other team that I have as a massive downgrade, and you mentioned them, you know, if somebody's a winner, somebody's a loser. It's in some ways not exactly like the NFL. It's not a total net zero game, but Marshall is the other. They're on the opposite end of the Southern Miss. The Riches and Marshall. It happened at their expense, and this is a team that has a. They win it's just the epitome of today's college football. It's what it comes down to. Just the transfer portal and the fact that they have immediate year-round free agency, basically. And everybody, when Charles Huff went to Southern Miss, made the move from Huntington to Harrison to Hattiesburg. A lot of good players went with him from the Thundering Herd. And so they're left with a pretty bare cupboard there in Huntington, West Virginia. Got a new coach in Tony Gibson, former North Carolina State defensive coordinator, got his work cut out for him. But Marshall certainly is a team, again, the defending champ in the Sun Belt. They're in the East Division of that conference. I've seen them either picked last in the East Division by some pundits, some media members, next to last by others. In any event, they've got a different team this year.
Those are great ones. And Marshall was my largest downgrade, as I kind of hinted to as well. So great stuff, Paul. I'm going to mention UNLV. They were a pretty large downgrade on my rankings because they lost everyone too, at least most of their team, as well as their coach who went to Purdue and brought a bunch of guys with him. They're a massive downgrade for me in the 11.5 point range. So they were big. Army's a big downgrade for me too, because they lost a lot of people, and you know how those military academies are. They're good when the guys have a lot of reps and have a year or two under their belt playing starting football. And they're, the fact that that's not going to happen, I thought was a big hit against that team too. You mentioned Syracuse already. That's a big one for me. I'm actually thinking maybe I'm still too high on them after you said that. I might have to make a few more. I'm gonna have to pull out my pick six previews right here and take a better look here at Syracuse. And Colorado is another one that's pretty big for me, just because I think Deion Sanders, and thank God he got through his cancer, but man, the distractions there, losing the Heisman Trophy winner, the other receiver in Horn, and obviously the quarterback is going to really affect this team, especially when your coach was been out for so long. So those are my biggest downgrades, Paul. Moving on. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, those are all interesting. It's just such a different landscape in college football because, before, there were teams that lost players when eligibility was finished, and, didn't have many returning starters coming back and that type of thing. But there weren't that many of those types of teams. And now we have teams, as you're indicating, that can their power rating can change from 10 to 15 points just overnight without much thought, just because of the tremendous shift in personnel and experience.
Absolutely. And you know what? Let's see how close we are. We already had made some bets based on these big power ratings, and that's why we spend the time that we do in the offseason to get these things right. But let's get into some Big 12 then. And, we can go top to bottom here. I have kind of my rankings, and the truth is there's not a lot of difference here between the top. I'm going to have you start and just tell me who your top team is coming in and why, and then we can move from there.
Okay. If I can talk just a little bit about the Big 12, if that's okay. This is just such an interesting league. To me, it might be the funnest league in America, whether you're talking about just watching, following, betting, whatever the case might be. I mean, it's so balanced. You had maybe no great teams last year, but you had some really good teams. And, of course, Arizona, could have, and they feel like they probably should have beat Texas in the playoff, Arizona State, the Sun Devils, and they have a lot of people back. So maybe there is a great team in there. But last year, 4 teams finished the regular season at 7-2 in conference play. 3 more teams were at 6-3. So you had 7 teams within one game of one another, and you had 2 more teams at 5-4. It would be difficult just from a mathematical probability standpoint to replicate that again this year. But they do have the same kind of balance this year that they had last year, and they have great quarterback play. I mean, they've got 7 quarterbacks who threw for over 2,700 yards last year, returning this year. And 4 of those threw for over 3,000 yards, that being Sawyer Robertson from Baylor, Bayron Morton from Texas Tech, Josh Hoover from TCU, and Rocco Becht from Iowa State. So a tremendous quarterback league. It's just going to be another exciting year. And I'll say, I think this is right, that of my top 7 teams, and I think there's 7 teams that could win this league, they're separated by only 4.5 points, power rating points.
Yeah.
So, and there'll begin to be some separation though, as games are played and we get results, those things will spread out. But in the preseason, it's just hard to distinguish between these top 7 teams in my mind. They're very, very tightly bunched, very similar, and it'll be interesting. But we're going to start do you want me to start at the top with my first team?
Please.
And then you want to give your first team then, and let's just go one after
I think
the other.
you fire away at the top, and I'll say where I have them listed, and then I'll just fire away at my top, and then say where you have them listed. I think we're going to be pretty close, and I don't see too much of a discrepancy.
And these teams again are tight, Kiev, and I know you'll probably be in the same manner. But this Arizona State team, I've got them as the highest power rated team in the Big 12. They obviously lose Cam Skataboo, their tailback. That's a lot of production there. They bring in Udo from Army, a 6 foot, 220-pound physical guy who will replace some of that production, but he won't replace all of it. But really, other than that, this is a team, they don't return obviously totally intact, but they return with a lot of the key pieces from that Big 12 championship team a year ago, most notably their head coach, Kenny Dillingham. I can't take anything away from Kurt Signetti. He was the national coach of the year, and it's not like that was the worst decision ever made by the media. But if I had a vote, I would have voted for Kenny Dillingham. I thought what he did at Arizona State was deserving of that, and I thought it was the best job, just a massive turnaround. And Indiana had a great year too, but they didn't upset anybody. Indiana was an underdog in 2 games, and they lost those 2 games decisively. A lot of what they did was, related to the schedule somewhat. So Kenny Dillingham's back. Their quarterback, Sam Levitt. I mean, that guy just he made some money last year. He'll probably make more this year. He's one of the better quarterbacks in all of college football. And they had arguably, maybe even inarguably, the best defense in the Big 12 last year. And a lot of the key figures from that defense are back. So Arizona State is my number 1 power rated team in the Big 12.
And you know what? I have them right up there too. I have them at number 2, so close to number 1. And like you already mentioned, losing Skataboo was probably my biggest part of the downgrade. But let's see what the Army guy does coming on in, replacing. But man, ranking number 2 in returning production, that is really fantastic. How do you not love what Kenny Dillingham is doing with this team? And they are just, beasts everywhere, especially on offense, ranking 15th in EPA on offense, 12th in passing, 18th in rushing. This team, they had heart, they had belief in themselves, and now they all return. They tasted success, and I think they're going to try to taste it again. It was tough to, put them slightly below my top team, but I understand why you have them as top, and it wouldn't shock me after 2 or 3 weeks if they move back to the top of my power ratings anyway. My number 1 team is Baylor, and Baylor, I just kind of thought that from a power rating last year, they were very close to Arizona State, but they had some stupid losses like the Hail Mary against Dion's group over there. That Hail Mary was silly. They needed to win that game to get through. I just thought, with what Baylor's been doing, they could be the best team in the nation. Here's what I like about them. They're number 9 in returning production, which is very close to the top, as you know. Sawyer Robertson is back. What's funny, in the transfer portal, there's not a lot of Big 12 teams minus Texas Tech that ranks up there, but in the net transfer on 3, they are the second best when it comes to transfer portal. Sawyer Robertson and Jake Spavital, their offensive coordinator. So you got the big trifecta back right here for this team. And if you want to look at from a schedule standpoint, they get ASU, Kansas State, and Utah all at home. So that is a very advantageous schedule to get their tough games at home in the Big 12. So I really, think that's a good, possibility that they're at least going to be in the Big 12 championship game. And that's what I like to bet on Baylor for that. So that's where I rank Baylor. Any comments before we move on?
And of course, my power ratings don't reflect schedule or anything like that. They're true power ratings that don't take into account, the conference. My conference order of finish might be somewhat different than this, so want to make that clear. But Baylor's certainly a team. I think just looking here, I've got them at number 3. And again, I adjust these all the time, and they'll be adjusted even before the season. Tweaked slightly, but you talked about Sawyer Robertson, the guy who actually signed with Mississippi State, and the late Mike Leach out of high school. And after Coach Leach, his untimely death, Sawyer Robertson returned to Texas, and now at Baylor, passed for over 3,000 yards last year. The running back Bryson Washington rushed for over 1,000 last year. He's back. Their top wide receiver Josh Cameron returns. 4 starting offensive linemen. They're really good offensively. And as a matter of fact, they won their last 6 regular season games last year, lost to LSU in the bowl game, but those 6 regular season victories in a row saved Dave Aranda's job, and they averaged right at 40 points a game in those last 7. So certainly Baylor is one team that I like a whole lot, and actually a team that I'll talk about a little bit later as well on one of the bets that I'll recommend. So I like the Baylor Bears as well.
Oh, love it. Well, great. Well, so then you gave us 2 and 3. Why don't you give us your number 1?
Well, the 1 was Arizona State. Baylor was 3, and the team that I kind of skipped over to talk about your first place team was Kansas State. And this is a team I'm maybe starting to have just a little bit as I dig deeper and you just look more closely, you start thinking about it closer. But that's where they are right now. And they obviously return a dual threat quarterback who's very dynamic in Avery Johnson. But they do have losses on both sides of the ball. And Avery Johnson, for all the talent that he possesses, he has committed quite a few turnover-worthy plays. He's thrown some interceptions, got to take a little bit better care of the ball. And one thing that concerns me, and I'm talking about being my number 2 power-rated team, and I'm bringing up some quote-unquote negatives, but they were -1 in turnovers last year. The previous 3 years combined, they were plus 27. So they usually win that turnover battle year after year, and I'm kind of anticipating a regression to the mean. The larger sample size indicates that Kansas State football, a tenet of it through the years has been winning that turnover battle. They're going to win the turnover battle. They're going to win the special teams battle. They're going to play solid defense, those types of things. And I just think they'll return to what they've done historically. They did stumble down the stretch last year, losing 3 of 4 in the regular season, but I've got Kansas State currently as my number 2 team, again, in a tightly bunched Big 12.
That's great you said that, because they're my number 3 team. So it looks like you and I are aligned in our top 3, just in a little bit different of an order. Yet, like we both said, razor thin margins. Yeah, I think that Avery Johnson got a little too excited sometimes and threw some bad turnovers in the end zone. And that's just not what a Chris Kleiman type team likes to do. And I think if that gets fixed, they could certainly move up to number 1, ranking 14th in returning production. Now obviously these are power ratings, like you mentioned, and it has nothing to do with the schedule, but they do have it a little bit rougher, having go to Baylor, to Utah, maybe to Kansas could be tough, being that's an in-state rivalry type situation. But from a scheduling standpoint, yes, that's a different discussion. Thanks for mentioning that. So yeah, Kansas State's still a very powerful team in my opinion, and it wouldn't shock me to see them move up into the championship game themselves. Well, you know what that means, Paul? Neither of you or I are drinking the Kool-Aid on my next team, which is, I think you guessed it, not too far maybe from you in Lubbock, Texas, the Texas Tech. And here's the thing. A lot of people have them number 1 for some of the stuff that they did. They ranked 6th in returning production. They were all in on the transfer portal this year. They spent a lot of money. And if you look at the on-3 net transfer ratings, they rank number 1 for what they lost and what they gained. But here's the thing with me. It's not enough to get to number 1, 2, or 3, because I upgraded them a pretty good amount. but it's just still not enough. I still need to see more, from their quarterback over there. I still need to see more out of this team if they're going to get my respect, because not all the time the transfer portal puts you in the top position. We've seen it many times that, it can be a little bit overrated at times. So I have them number 4. Maybe you're a little bit different on Texas Tech. So you can mention that and then give us your number 4.
Well, you've given my number 4. My number 4 also is Texas Tech, Kiev. The Red Raiders, as you said, they were one of the portal winners. I would make LSU the overall portal winner, but certainly respect all the great work that On3 does there. But Texas Tech is certainly in the top, 3 or 4 teams in the portal. They have a mega booster, a guy who sold his oil and gas company called Double Eagle. A guy named Cody Campbell sold that gas and oil company for over $4 billion earlier this year. The B word, not the M word, billion. Wow. Oh. So, and he loves athletics and he loves the Red Raiders. So Cody Campbell is funding a lot of the NIL that's taking place there at Texas Tech.
It's a drop in the bucket for him, isn't it?
Drop in the bucket. And he's got a crony or two that helps him out. The softball pitcher Kennedy, who came from Stanford in the offseason and pitched them to within one series of the national championship. That's part of that movement too there in Lubbock. But they've always been a sleeping giant facilities wise, and they've got the money and they've shown the money. And it's a new age of college football, and Texas Tech can play the game. So they do have some players there, some better players. They need to get better on defense, and I think they did get better on defense without question. They get a edge rusher from Stanford, David Bailey, who's a big-time guy. Romello Height from Georgia Tech has got some sacks through his career. Defensive tackle Lee Carter might be one of the better defensive tackles in college football they got from Central Florida. So I think that defense, sometimes I think we all are guilty of just thinking about the offense, and we tend to kind of lean a lot of our analysis that way, myself included. But defense is really where I see improvement. And you're talking about that quarterback play. Bayron Morton has been good when he's been healthy, but he hasn't always been healthy. He also had off-season shoulder surgery, so he's had trouble staying on the field. They've got a big-time recruit and backup, Will Hammond, who actually I'm sure you watched the game. He played in the bowl game against Arkansas. Will Hammond did. So he got some much-needed experience. And due to whatever set of circumstances, at some point, I think we'll see Will Hammond play meaningful football this year for Texas Tech. But like you, I have the Red Raiders in this tightly bunched Big 12 power rating hierarchy at number 4.
That's fair. That's fair. And it's great that you and I both share the top 4 like that. And we both nailed the actual number 4 pick. So who is your number 5 pick for the top of the power ratings in the Big 12?
Going to be the TCU Horned Frogs. And TCU is one of those teams that returns a big-time quarterback. Josh Hoover threw for 3,949 yards last year, so almost hit that 4,000-yard standard, that rarefied air. They do. You're talking about schedules, and even those his power ratings, they do have a pretty tough schedule in the league. But from a power rating standpoint, I put them at number 5. And again, these teams are just so closely bunched. They could be flip-flopped after just 1 week of play. Yeah. And their defense historically has been good under Sonny Dykes. Sonny Dykes is a great football coach, and the defense needs to get a little bit better. I think it will get better, but they've got a good situation, a good offense to build around Josh Hoover as their quarterback.
2.5 years ago, they were in the championship game. I mean, that is something. Yeah, you can't forget about the Horned Frogs. And you're right. I have them right next to my next group too. They're just literally tied with like BYU and Utah. So I'm pretty much right there with you too. And I think this is a team that had some value looking at their over, and Sonny Dykes is a great coach. I'm glad you mentioned the defense, because that's always been his little bit of I guess Achilles heel a little bit. But if he can fix that defense a little bit, this team could sneak right up there in the top 2, top 3 as well, and pretty good returning production. So I'm glad you mentioned that. What about number 6 for Paul Stone's rankings?
Number 6, and this is a team that could definitely move up. It's going to be the Utah Utes, and I talked about it a little bit earlier. The main ingredient that they add is the quarterback. Devin Dampier, who comes over again from New Mexico with his offensive coordinator Jason Beck, just a big time dynamic athlete. Just produced tremendous numbers last year in the run game and the pass game. He did throw 12 interceptions against 12 touchdowns. He's going to have a better supporting cast at Utah than he had at New Mexico. But on the flip side, he's going to be facing a much higher caliber of defense. So it's going to be interesting to see how guys like Devon Dampier at Utah moving up in class. John Mateer, this is a different conference, but at Oklahoma, how's he going to adjust going from Washington State to the Southeastern Conference? How's his game and his numbers going to translate? So that's the big question with Dampier. But Kyle Whittingham, he's just been doing this too long. He's been too good too long. Hearing him, I attended Big 12 media days in Frisco outside of Dallas, Texas. And, he talked about, I couldn't end on that kind of a note. So he's kind of hinting that he's ready to get out at some point. He's not gonna be their coach 4 years from now. I have no doubt about that. And I think if they would have had a better season last year, that might have been the end. And I think if they win the conference this year, it might be. And they're certainly a team that could. I mean, they go 5-7 last year, very disappointing year. They suffered again from subpar quarterback play. They had 4 quarterbacks throw 30 or more passes. When you're trotting 4 different guys out there who are playing for you at quarterback, that means you don't have a quarterback. They probably almost got somebody out of the stands. So, they're going to play solid defense. They've got a core of players back on defense, got a solid veteran offensive line. I saw one publication ranked at the top 5, one of the top 5 offensive lines in all of college football. So Utah is a team that, although I've got them a little bit further back in the pecking order, I mean, I could see them winning the conference and wouldn't blink an eye.
Oh, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you got no quarterbacks. If you have 4 quarterbacks, just give up. Maybe they should add that to the thing for what Utah did. Kyle Whittingham, the new Arkansas coach. I mean, could that be a possible headline? You never know. Kyle Whittingham, I don't know if he's going to retire or what he's going to do, but, I'm glad you brought up the coach because he's a great coach, in my opinion. And he's made a lot of something out of nothing in the past. And now he's got something, and Devin Dampier does have to be better, but you pair him with better players and a better coach. The sky's the limit. And, that they can just shore up that defense and get those trenches going like they used to. This could be a very dangerous Utah team. And I also have them at 6, Paul. So there you go. I have Utah at 6. I do say that at 5, which is very close to TCU and Utah anyway, I do have the Iowa State Clones. And this team, I just kind of feel fell off the watermelon wagon last year. And, I don't know what's going on. I think that there's just a lot of choke with Matt Campbell. They returned some guys like Rocco Becht, but they just did not do anything in the portal, really. It's not like if your recruiting isn't, top 20, top 30, and you're not going in the transfer portal, I can't rank you that high. And I just feel that I might even be wrong at 5 for Iowa State. So I don't know where you have Iowa State, but please, by all means, go right into your number 7.
Number 7 is Iowa State, and they're one of the 7 teams that I think could win it, could win the Big 12. I talked, I think, in the beginning that I think 7 teams have a chance to win this conference. And Iowa State is the 7th of those teams. And like you, Kiev, I have some concerns about Iowa State because they did lose some big-time talent, and they didn't really replenish the coffers, so to speak. They do return Rocco Becht, 27 career starts, a guy who threw for over 3,000 yards last year, has really come into his own. But they lose 2 wide receivers in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, who both had almost 1,200 yards individually in receiving last year. Those guys were both Friday night draft picks, one in the 2nd round, one in the 3rd round. Losing that kind of productivity at the wide receiver position is concerning because it's going to be difficult to replace that. And then they lost a lot on the defensive front. Under Matt Campbell in recent years, the Cyclones have played really solid, sound defense. and they lost some people up front. They don't appear, at least going into the year, to be at the same level up front as they have been in recent years. So a little bit of concerns about Iowa State, but at the same time, they've got a great coach in Matt Campbell. They've got a veteran quarterback in Rocco Beck. And sometimes, teams like that are maybe a little bit off the radar can surprise and, make some noise. So I'm certainly not counting out Iowa State. They are my number 7 power rated team in the Big 12.
I was on Texas Tech last year when they had 7 wins in a row, and they were looking like they were going to win the Big 12. And they all of a sudden play Texas Tech at home and lose by a point. And then they play Kansas at home and lose pretty bad. And that was the end of them. They were still in it until they went to ASU. And then it was just so funny, but we can't forget about them. So I'm glad you mentioned that because, they could sneak up there as well. What about your number 8 team in the Big 12?
It'd be BYU. They obviously lost Jake Retzloff, their quarterback from last year, and he exited the program and has landed at Tulane as a walk-on. And they've got the main reason is, they've got such a significant question at that quarterback position. They're going to have to go with somebody. They've got 2 guys who have played and started games, but at a much lower level of play. Trayson Bourget, who started games in the past at Western Michigan, and then Utah State. I think this will be the guy, McKay Hillstead, more of a runner, kind of an athlete playing quarterback. I think he'll ultimately be their opening game starter, but Hillstead from Utah State. And then they have a true freshman, Bear Bachmeier, younger brother of Hank Bachmeier. The Bear Bachmeier actually signed, he's a true freshman to be. He signed with Stanford out of high school. He was in spring training with Stanford this year. And as you'll recall, they fired their head coach in March, Troy Taylor, for allegedly mistreating female staff members. And Bachmeier elected to transfer. So he transfers to BYU at the end of spring practice, is there like the last day or 2 of practice, but doesn't participate. So he has no practice time yet with the Cougars, but he could be a factor in that race as well, because I'm sure he's got a high skill level, just needs some experience. So based on their quarterback position, that's where BYU falls in line in my Big 12 power ratings.
I remember last year when BYU beat SMU at SMU, and everyone's like, holy cow. And then they're ripping all these wins. They're number 1. They're ready to, thinking Big 12 championship game minimum. Then they lose to Kansas, and then they lose to Kansas State, and all of a sudden their conference record screws up and they can't, play for the championship. It was just crazy how they fell. And yeah, the Retzlaff thing, there's a lot of different rules you have to follow at BYU, as people know. And I think that sometimes it holds this program back, but I don't even know what's going on at quarterback now. And because of that, I also do not have them that high, but I have them right here where you said to. I am with you that they should be around the 7 and 8 range, which I think brings us to number 9, Paul. And we have a couple more minutes to discuss this, and we'll just kind of mention the last few teams before we go into your predictions for a national championship. But who do you have next in the Big 12?
I have, be sure I'm right here. I've got actually Colorado, just a notch ahead of my number 10 team. But this is a Colorado team. Obviously, they lose, as you mentioned earlier, Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter. And that's basically like losing 2 All-America players, an All-America wide receiver, an All-America cornerback. So that's a very difficult individual to replace. They lose Shedeur Sanders. I think you mentioned Jimmy Horn, another wide receiver who put up big numbers. So they definitely have some losses personnel-wise. And then you've got Deion Sanders' health concerns. The most important thing is that right now he's healthy, and it sounds like the long-term prognosis is good, which, excited to hear that. But you've got to wonder about any, issues that might arise from that, any distractions, so forth and so on. They do bring in from Liberty, Caden Salter, a tremendous athlete, dual threat guy out of the state of Texas, who originally signed with Tennessee out of Cedar Hill High School outside of Dallas. I think Caden Salter will be their their starter, but he's kind of their quarterback in waiting. They have a true freshman, Julian Lewis, a true 5-star guy from Carrollton, Georgia. He actually should be a senior in high school this year, but he classified up a year. He's in camp there at Boulder, and he will definitely play some this year. And he might even be the starter, could even be the starter from day one. But I think they're going to allow him to watch a little bit. And if he becomes the starter this year, it'll probably be closer to midseason. But I like Caden Salter as a quarterback. He's not Shedeur Sanders, but he is a capable replacement. And Julian Lewis, the sky's the limit. He lacks experience, obviously, at the collegiate level. He's only 17 years old. But I think Colorado could, they're not going to win the league, but I think they could, win a game, maybe that they're not supposed to, and throw a wrench in somebody else's plans.
Well, that's funny. You said that about, you can say that about everybody in the Big 12 because Cincinnati beat ASU last year, right? And they're kind of sitting there after Colorado for me. Colorado's low for me because, like I said, one of my biggest downgrades in my power ratings. We'll see what Salter does, or possibly Lewis coming in at quarterback. But with those distractions, there's no way that I can have them, anywhere where they're going to be meddling. Dion will get them up to upset somebody. We just got to figure out that time when it comes to the season. And to be honest with you, like the rest of them, I don't like Satterfield that much at Cincinnati. I just, they do return their quarterback there, Sorsby, but, and he actually looked good for some flashes last year, but losing those 5 in a row last year, you wonder where their heads at. I think Houston's kind of a sleeper team for some people. I'm not a Connor Wegman guy, but they did kind of rely a little bit on defense last year. Remember how bad they were in the beginning of the season. Then they did beat Kansas State and Utah, which was very surprising. I think I lost the bet against the Utah game. I don't know how the heck they decided to show up, but they did get better as the year kind of went on. I really love Kansas's coach. I think that this team is just with Jalen Daniels. Can you trust him to be healthy all year? And this is a team that replaces almost everybody on offense and almost everybody on defense. And, God bless Lance Leopold, but he's just I think this is just the year that he's going to have to rebuild. Oklahoma State doesn't return anybody on offense, so throw them in the garbage. So, and then I don't even want to talk about Arizona because I think they have the worst coach in the Big 12 and will be dead last. I wouldn't mind taking a prop on the Arizona being dead last in the Big 12, Paul. So that's my synopsis of the rest of the teams. Any thoughts on any of those?
Yeah, I'll kind of just follow up with mine. My next team would be Kansas, and you're talking about Jalen Daniels. He's a guy who's been injury prone. He needs to not only get healthy, he needs to get more consistent. When he's been good, he's been really good. So if he could get on his game, and they need him to be on his game because they've lost a lot of personnel, he could, they could make some noise in the league as well. But you're looking at a team in Kansas. They lose the running back Devin Neal, 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons rushing to end his career. So that's a lot of production there. Their top 7 pass catchers are gone, as are 9 of the top 11 tacklers. So they've got some attrition there and some people that they've got to replace. Cincinnati, I've got next. Not a whole lot to get excited about there. They do return their quarterback in Brendan Sorsby. Got some pretty good defensive players as well. I've got Cincinnati next. Then I've got Houston. A big-time coach from around these parts, Willie Fritz, did great things at Tulane. Before that, I think he was at Sam Houston State. But he's just an old-timey, gritty football coach. A lot of people around these parts are expecting, some improvement from the Cougars. But just looking at it on paper, I'm kind of like you, Connor Wegman. I think he's an upgrade, but he needs to stay healthy. That's kind of a recurring theme here. He's had some injury issues, but I don't know if he's a upper echelon Big 12 quarterback. And they got hurt in the portal a little bit. They lost 2 really big time defensive backs, 2 members of their secondary. Lost one of those guys to LSU, lost one of them to Florida State. Then I have Central Florida, followed by West Virginia, followed by Arizona, and I have Oklahoma State at the bottom of the Big 12. I think Oklahoma State is one of the 5 worst Power 4 teams in college football. How the mighty have fallen. They were playing the Texas Longhorns less than 2 years ago in 2023 in the Big 12 championship game. But things have really gotten lean there in Stillwater. Again, I went to Big 12 Media Days, and he has over 60 new players on his roster. Over 30 of them he's never even seen practice. They showed up in the late portal, so they didn't even go through spring drills. They don't have a quarterback on roster who's ever taken a snap at Oklahoma State. So I'm expecting they went 3-9 last year, expecting more of the same from the Cowboys this year.
Absolutely. And, Arizona's only got Fafita really to lean on. And he just seems like he got frustrated last year and he doesn't have a lot of players around. Yeah, Rich Rod going to West Virginia is really interesting because they were not returning really anybody. It should be a honeymoon year for them. Like you mentioned, it's like, shouldn't be one of the better teams, but I'm really curious how that spread option is going to work. His type of offense, will speed to it, right? A lot of run. And like you just saw at Jacksonville State, it's like you wonder how that's going to develop, if it's going to hit a couple people off guard. I don't know. I think that's going to be the most intriguing watch is what West Virginia looks like coming on in. But for the sake of time, my friend, let's talk a little bit about, the national championship. And I'm curious who you think will represent. And it's a stupid question. It's because it's not like, something we bet on, but this is kind of where I go off the wall a little bit, maybe just have a bold prediction. But who do you think gets to the national title game and wins it?
I'll say Texas and Penn State, and I'll say Texas, again, things can change, but I'll predict Texas is the national champion. Again, they've recruited at such a high level. The last 4 years since Sarkisian's been there, people are talking about some of the holes that they have. They really don't have any holes besides the offensive line. They have new players, but they're kind of like Georgia was again a few years ago. They have 5 stars coming in, and in some cases, even though they're going to be first-year starters, they'll be better than the players they're replacing. So they're very talented. They do need to identify 2 offensive linemen who will be newbies who really hadn't played. But you mentioned Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State, the wide receiver last year, true freshman. Ryan Williams, Alabama, true freshman last year. A guy named Dylan Stewart was a defensive end at South Carolina, also a true freshman last year. But the freshman of the year was Colin Simmons, the defensive end at the University of Texas. He's a man. I mean, he's this year he could be the best player in college football. I think he's that good. He's from Duncanville, Texas. You talking about producing college football players. It's just a factory in a state that has several of them. But you got Colin Simmons on the edge. He's put on weight. You've got Anthony Hill at linebacker, a guy who will be a Thursday night selection this coming April, probably a top 10 pick. And they've just got a great defense. I think Athlon magazine, they rank the units. And I don't agree with this, but this just tells you what people think about them. They rank the defensive line, the linebackers, and the secondary nationally. Texas, the number 1 defensive line. Texas, the number 1 linebacking core. Texas, the number 1 secondary. And I think that's a little bit over the top. Yeah. They do need to find a couple of defensive tackles. That would be their other question. But they're going to have a great defense. And I think going into the season, I would expect them to have the best defense in the country. Arch Manning, it's fair to ask questions. How good will he be? I don't think anybody doubts that he's going to be some level of good, but being the Heisman Trophy betting odds favorite, that's not good. That's great. And that's with a very small resume of games. He started 2 games. He hadn't played a whole lot, but I don't have great doubt about Arch Manning. It would be ludicrous to act like, he's going to go in there, win the Heisman Trophy. I'm not going to bet on him to win the Heisman Trophy, go in there and throw for 4,000 yards. But he's just been carefully groomed. He's been slowly marinated. He's been in the program for 2 years. He has the Manning surname. He's clearly not your typical junior who's waited 2 years to play. And one thing, and you've seen bits of it, but you'll see more of it this year, and they're not afraid to do it despite his NFL future, the guy is a runner. And he can run away from people, right? He's physical, and he's kind of nasty when he runs the ball. But I don't have any really big concerns about Arch Manning. I think he'll be a championship quarterback. And given one team to pick, it would be Texas.
It's hard to really argue with that. I remember Colt McCoy running like that when he was playing a little bit for Texas. There's there's a lot of argument to say that it's going to be Texas up there, and I don't disagree. I'm just going to give you one off the wall. I'll go LSU versus Ohio State. Why not? I mean, LSU's got Nussmeier. I think they have some of the talent now, grown up a little bit on that defense. I mean, it's Brian Kelly, I know, but if I wasn't going to say them, I guess I'd say Alabama. But I'm going to say LSU just because like I said, I have all these teams pretty close to my power ratings anyway, and I just want to be a little different. If I just took 1 and 2, it'd be Ohio State versus Penn State or Alabama, right? So I'll be a little different and say LSU this year just because I think the SEC is more up in the year than it's ever been. A lot of people say that, the Big 12 is the one that you have to scratch your head, but the truth is I think the SEC has about 6-7 teams that you can make a strong argument about possibly getting in that national championship game and possibly winning it. So that's my thoughts. What's up, Keith? Thanks for checking in. Cheers to you, Keith Landry. Thank you for that. And that kind of just leads me to a couple bets. I'll give you week 1 bet. I took LSU plus 3.5 against Clemson. I know, it's kind of the battle of the Tigers, right? We'll pick the Tigers. Yeah, the old stupid joke there. It's really a situation where I just don't have as much faith in the ACC, and where I have LSU ranked, I have to bet it at the hook at 3.5. It's like, why do power ratings if you're not going to bet the better team at plus 3.5, even though it's away? It's not like an injury's happened right now. I was kind of wondering why so much money came in on Clemson last week to push that over, but I think LSU is just the better team. And, as good as Clemson is, laying 3.5 is a lot of points. And I think LSU at least keeps it close, and they could be winning the game and possibly lose it at the end, and you still cover your spread. So I like LSU in this game.
And, and LSU is a national champion participant and perhaps a winner. I certainly can't argue with that. I noted in the opening, near the opening of our time together here, my thoughts on LSU. One of the bets that I like, and I think it's still available at plus 130 at Circa, is LSU to make the playoff. And again, you can get that at plus money. So I'll offer that, LSU plus 130 to make the college football 12-team college football playoff. And I do agree. To me, there's 4 teams you really got to consider, and you can certainly go further down the list. But I mean, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and LSU, to me, those 4 teams are pretty tight. I could see any of them winning the SEC. It's not like some past years where whether they won it or not in the preseason, you had one team that was clearly going to be the preseason favorite. It's just not like that in the SEC this year. But I'll give a couple of other quick bets here. These will both be regular season win totals, and I won't go into great detail because we spent today talking about the Big 12. But these are 2 teams. They're both going to be unders. So it's good when you bet 2 teams in the same conference under their win total. It's good when they don't play each other because somebody's going to win that game, and that's going to be, a push towards the over. I'm taking West Virginia under 5.5. It's available today, minus 150 at BetMGM. So it is juiced to the under, but they lost a lot of players. I don't think the second time around is going to be as good as the first for Rich Rod. Their 2 top players, their top offensive players, C.J. Donaldson, a running back. He goes to Ohio State. Ohio State, they don't take any bad players. So that tells you how good he would have been. And then on defense, they lose their linebacker, Josiah Trotter. He was the Big 12 Defensive Freshman of the Year last year, son of former NFL great Jeremiah Trotter. He's off to Missouri, so I like them under 5.5 wins. And then Oklahoma State, under 5.5 wins. Today it was minus 175 at BetMGM. And again, they were 3-9 last year. I feel badly for Mike Gundy, not that he's the most, some people, like him, love him, or loathe him. The guy can coach football, and he's shown he can coach football. And I think over the last 20 years, he has outperformed expectations with that program as much as anybody at any program in the country. But things have shifted so much in college football with the transfer portal and NIL that I think he's clearly at somewhat of a disadvantage, and it's showing through. They were 3-9 last year. I think they're probably 3-9 again this year. So Oklahoma State also under 5.5 regular season wins.
Well, there you go. A couple good Big 12 bets. I can't disagree with that. Yeah, I do think that he's kind of, that coach that just won't grasp the portal quite as much as other ones. And you even see Dabo Sweeney kind of coming around a little bit this year, grabbing some people. And, he really hasn't. But yeah, I will say he has overachieved in many years. And that's the only thing that would scare me. But he doesn't have really a foot to stand on here when he's not moving too many players here. Real quick, Keith said week 1 curse LSU 0-5 in week 1 games. Yes, but look at Brian Kelly as a dog. Brian Kelly has +3.5 dog or more. That is a big trend of betting on. And a lot of that happened when he was at Notre Dame. But when Brian Kelly is a dog, the team always stops by. So we got trend versus trend, my friend. You see that a lot when it comes to college football. But what you don't see a lot is great cappers like Paul Stone coming out and helping us out and talking about college football, man. And Paul, really love you having you on. Could you tell our listeners where they could find your information and great plays?
I sure will, Kiev. I first want to point out, and I'm not taking a side one way or the other necessarily, although I do kind of like the LSU plus the points. But Clemson last year, they played 3 SEC teams. They played Georgia in the opener. You might remember that game. They played South Carolina, probably the regular season finale. And then they played Texas in the playoffs. So they played 3 SEC teams, and they either went 0-3 or 3-0. Which they went. So the SEC is a different brand, but I'm not disparaging Clemson because, man, they are good. That's just a great football game and a great week 1 of the better ones we've had in a long time. But I appreciate being on, and I try to be active on Twitter. There's a lot of noise out there and a lot of stuff. I try to just keep it to statistics and point spread information and stuff like that. Try to provide tweets that are quality information to people who like to handicap college football. And then if they want to take their interest a step further, they can check my service out and see what I offer. My site, paulstonesports.org.
Absolutely. And you're right, Keith, that hook is very important. So yeah, make sure you guys check out Paul. He's one of the best. Paul will be tweeting. We'll be talking. Have a great season, and we wish you best of luck with the rest of August.
Hey, same to you guys. Appreciate you having me on.